Hello, I'm unable to and welcome to a video where I discuss my taxonomy of racial discrimination. This is the fifth version of my chart that I've made. So I have made some amendments since the last time, even though it has been quite a short time. So now let's get right into the description of this. So anyway, I decided to organize various forms of racial discrimination into a few different categories based more on the ideological sense. Now, I've decided not to go into the idea of whether or not power is associated with discrimination, as I do not believe that that really factors in that much into the ideological calculations of such ideas. So let's get right into the action here. So, of course, at the top we have racial agnosticism, which means agnosis, which means not knowing. Therefore, a person who is a racial agnostic is someone who does not see differences in ethnicities. In other words, one that would not be able to recognize differences between different ethnic groups, or someone who has never encountered individuals of a different ethnic group or know that they exist. Therefore, that person would be a racial agnostic. Now, the other main category is that of racial discrimination. And discrimination here, I use the term discrimination to describe the idea of discerning differences between ethnic groups. So that's what I mean by discrimination. I'm not referring to any prejudicial action or any oppression of any sort at this point. So discrimination can be categorized into two separate categories: individualistic discrimination and collectivistic discrimination. Individualistic discrimination sees different ethnic groups but does not ascribe behavior as being essential to that ethnic group. Therefore, it does not have a biological essentialism relating to ethnicity when it concerns behavior or other positive or negative qualities. Individualistic viewpoint, of course, views each member of an ethnicity as an individual who has an individualistic agency and individualistic merit when it concerns various forms of merit. So to go into the difference between that and the collectivistic viewpoint is that races are coherent groups. Therefore, this could mean that these groups have common interests or common behavioral typology. So those are the two different viewpoints. So I've decided that for my purposes, I'm going to define this collectivistic determination as racism, as it is an ideology, therefore, that follows the idea that races act as groups rather than the individuals within the races acting as individuals. So there you go. Now, for the subtypes of individualistic discrimination, I have two kinds. I have non-correlative discrimination and correlative discrimination. Non-correlative discrimination is a type of discrimination where an individual will recognize different ethnicities but will not make any correlations for behavior or other features beyond the physical identifiers of the ethnicity. Meanwhile, correlative discrimination, while still in the context of an individualistic viewpoint, is ideas such as racial profiling, in the sense that individuals see that there is a correlation between a certain ethnic group and perhaps certain types of behavior, and therefore, while they're not condemning every member of the ethnic group because they're not looking at it collectivistically, they see perhaps a greater need for response in a certain area. Or another correlative discrimination would be in the sense of certain medications might be more effective on individuals of certain ethnic groups. I don't think that that is an unreasonable discrimination to make if it is biologically true. So anyway, going back to the collectivistic discrimination, there's two primary kinds. There's scientific racism and ideological racism. Now, scientific racism, to be very clear, is any type of racism that is purely based on scientific study, in the sense that someone can say objectively that every member of a certain ethnic group has a certain behavioral or meritocratic quality. However, the difference between that and ideological racism is that ideological racism is not always based on such a strong scientific idea, and also very frequently, even if there is a claim of a scientific idea, and I'm just going to point out that many claims that have been made are false, or at least not encompassing to the ethnic group, therefore not actively, not effectively scientific. Despite that, there are individuals who do claim to have a scientific position, but then take an ideological position as well, and to delineate the idea of the question of the is to ought dilemma, where something is a certain way, and then you decide what to do about it. Once you decide what to do about it, you have entered a different paradigm, and that is an ideological paradigm, rather than the simple scientific, let's study and let's gain more knowledge about what's going on. So, ideological racism, when of course unaccompanied by any scientific warrant, is of course prejudicial. And prejudicial, of course, meaning to make a prejudgment. Therefore, you take an individual of a certain ethnicity and you make a judgment on that person relating to a certain quality without particularly knowing whether that applies to that person in a particular way. It is, in essence, what some might say the reverse of what one might call the informal fallacy referred to as a no true Scotsman's fallacy, where you see someone who is of a certain ethnicity and you automatically assume something about that person, even though that quality is not essential to that ethnicity. Therefore, it is not a scientifically essential quality, and therefore it is prejudicial. So, out of the ideological racism, there's two large subgroups. There's ethnic egalitarianism, where the ethnic groups or the races are considered as either being equal or should, or the idea that they should be equal. And then there's ethnic differentialism, which is that they should not be equal, but should be different in certain senses. Now, there's different ways that this is applied. So, when referring to ethnic egalitarianism, there you have two primary paradigms to that. There's the equality paradigm and the equity paradigm. Now, remember, if you're talking about equality and equity in this context, we're still talking about a collectivistic context referring to the races. So when we're referring to equality, we're not talking about the equality of individuals in this sense, but about the equality of races as a whole, or the equity of races as a whole. So equality being equal in the sense of having equal rights, equity being equal in other aspects, such as having equal wealth and various different points. Now, these two paradigms are, of course, frequently seen used among a lot of progressive groups, especially in relation to intersectionality and critical race theory. But anyway, moving on, there's also something that I would refer to as ethnic separationism, which could be part of ethnic egalitarianism, but could also be part of ethnic differentialism, depending on which avenue is used to get there. So with ethnic separationism, you have two sub-ideas, but to describe it in itself, it is the idea that ethnic groups should be separated in various ways. So there's internal segregation, which would mean that the two ethnic groups exist in the same space, but have separate subspaces within that space. A good example would be the idea of separate but equal. And this could be part of an idea of giving an equality to the ethnic groups, but it could also be a part of a type of oppression as well. Probably not both at the same time. So then there's also ethnic nationalism, which is the idea that the ethnic groups should not exist in the same space at all, but should be in different spaces, which is not necessarily going on the idea that the races are unequal or that they are equal, but it could be either one. So then, out of the pure ethnic differentialism, there's multiple subgroups of ways to deal with the idea that the races are somehow inherently different. So one would be a libertarian ethnic Darwinist approach, where you don't do anything about it and simply allow the market to guide the superior races according to this ideology to the top. Then there's naive racism, which is what I refer to the idea that one encounters someone of another ethnic group that has perhaps never been encountered before, and one does not have any particular ideological position, but strongly disapproves of the other person. Simply due to that ethnic group in itself. That's what I refer to as naive racism, because it does not have any underlying ideology behind it. It simply is, of course, a form of racism. It's prejudicial, and it certainly has an idea of ethnic differentialism with the sense that someone is something other than oneself, and it does not have any ideological root, therefore it is naive racism. Now, the final subgrouping here of ethnic differentialism is what I refer to as ethnic supremacism, where the idea is that the races should try in some way to actively compete. So there's two sub-paradigms to this. There's the hierarchy paradigm, where the races should organize with the superior races at the top, or that different races are suited to different positions in society. And then there's the elimination paradigm, which, to put it bluntly, is just straight up genocide. So essentially, to give a quick review of what I talked about, anyone who is familiar with individuals of various ethnic groups is by definition someone who is in some way racially discriminating. Not that this is a bad thing necessarily at this level. And there are two different viewpoints to take. There's an individualistic viewpoint, and then there's a collectivistic viewpoint, which I consider to be the racist viewpoint. And out of the collectivistic viewpoint, there is a form of scientific racism, where one looks collectively at a race and makes a fully applicable scientific determination. And then there's a more ideological type of racism, which is more prejudicial, where one looks at the differences between ethnic groups and chooses to do something about those differences. And those differences can either be viewed as in an egalitarian sense, that there should be equality, or a differentialist sense that there should not be equality, with there being questions of whether equity or equality is a better thing to aspire to in society, a question of whether ethnic groups should be separated, whether internally within a state or in different ethnostates, the question of if races are indeed different, should they simply be allowed to prosper based on market forces, or the classic idea of naive racism, where an individual may be racist towards someone without having any ideological warrant for it, and then ethnic supremacism with the hierarchy and the elimination paradigms sub to it. So thank you all for watching. Tell me what you think. Are there other types of ethnic discrimination that I may not have fully discussed in this video? Do you have a different paradigm on what you think racial discrimination is? Please tell me in the comments section below. I would be happy to hear any thoughts you have. So thank you all for watching, and I will be seeing you all next time on Awiltus. Over and out.